Welcome to This American Principal, a weekly podcast dedicated to telling the real stories of school leadership. This week, I am thrilled to welcome Tracy Vandeventer from Salt Lake City, Utah, the principal who actually nudged me towards leadership. Together, we unpack the unseen parts of the job, the loneliness of big decisions, the discipline of quick wins, and the power of servant leadership to change a school's climate. Tracy shares how she begins at a new school, meeting with every staff member and asking 3 simple questions to surface patterns, set priorities, and earn credibility early. We also get honest about the emotional weight leaders carry, especially in communities experiencing trauma, and the importance of renewal so we don't lead from exhaustion. This conversation is a masterclass in leading through complexity while protecting your own well-being, so you can stay present for the kids and adults who serve them.
All right. No personal secrets out there.
So you were the principal that told me I should be a principal.
Yes.
I was a year away from finishing my PhD.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but I saw you in the hallway and you said, I know you think you're this academic, but you're really an administrator. And I was like, what do you mean? You're like, you like to be in the mix. Like, you're right.
It's true. You like to solve. That's the difference. Academic wants to compare statistics, but you really wanted to be that solution agent, being able to see and reap the benefits of the work.
We're such doers. You and I shared that passion of school improvement and actually making things better for kids and staying so laser focused on that. You really were the model that I was trying to emulate. I know you had been a tech coach and then Lincoln, then Edison. So you were elementary principal. Where'd you go after that?
I moved to a high school assistant principal position at a Title I school. And very few secondary schools in Utah are Title I, but this is one that has definitely some challenges. I loved the work. I learned a lot. And it was interesting to see where students go and what the expectations are. Then they asked me to move to a middle school. So I was a middle school principal, and that's like a whole nother podcast we could do. But from there, I moved back into the elementary level and stayed at the elementary level till I moved to the State Office of Education, where I was the director for the Center for Continuous School Improvement, and then recently retired.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. 35 years. Still have a little bit of an itch.
I remember there was a lunch we went to that you were talking about the lack of support for leadership. And I remember being like, what are you talking about? And I had just never thought about that because I think teachers or even like a coach level, you just really have no idea how isolating that role can be and how little support there is in terms of an actual group you can belong to get help with the job.
Yeah. To my last position, I was a principal supervisor, and it is a great way to be able to help people in their work and brainstorm with them and problem solve and build systems. But it's an uncomfortable position in the sense that I'm also your supervisor, right? So you've got this work that you need to do to build that trust and that understanding and getting people to be in that place where they feel safe, being able to say, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I really could use help with this. Because in a sense, you're sort of confessing at the same time to your boss that, I kind of suck at this. So that's a tough place. If you continue to nurture that relationship, it can be done and you could still be in that evaluative role. Because even in this last year, as I was calling people maybe on some changes that I think they needed to be made, it wasn't a surprise. They knew, and they were actually eager to jump into that work because they saw how important it was, and it was something we'd been working on for the year. But the truth is, there isn't enough support for principals that is simply just for their own coaching without that evaluative role. And if you step back even a little further, I do not think we do a very good job on preparing people to be in the shoes of a school administrator. We just haven't figured that out very well. But we really need to get people feedback about all the range of providing leadership, not just about instructional leadership. There's so much there that you could be a great instructional leader, but if you are not able to build relationships, or if you don't have the capacity to be able to organize systems or follow through, I mean, there's just so many moving pieces that you've got to have an outsider
There's
giving you
so
feedback.
many like dimensions to the role.
Yeah.
How would you describe some of your strengths?
Well, at some point, I asked the staff at Edison, right?
Yeah.
Give me some feedback. And I got feedback to say, we can't find you and you don't get back to us on email.
Yeah.
Right? So I was difficult to find because I was out roaming in the building a lot. I was, in classrooms, but my colleagues, my teachers felt that that was really difficult because if they needed something, they had a hard time tracking me down. I have always really found email to be a struggle as a tool for communication. I got better. I never got good at it. I got to a place where my phone, it could be a tether, and texting was something I could do more immediate. So that was definitely an area where it was out of balance at being able to be in my office enough time to be able to get some of the must-dos, right, taken care of, the pieces to keep the machine moving forward. And it's not that it didn't get done, but sometimes I had to be late, or sometimes I had to be there early, or other things, had to take place. And so I think that there is a balance about being available and being, in your office. That probably was a little bit of an area where I was struggling. I think the pieces that I was good at, that's always a hard question for people, but I think I did a pretty good job on building relationships with people and being able to give people authentic feedback to help them improve their practice. I think I was relentless, which from some people might be a downside, but I think I was relentless about this is the important work that we have to do. We have got to make sure that our students are prepared for the next level. And it might be very inconvenient. And I'll help you find a new place if this is not your fit. I understand this is very hard work. I don't know. What would you say?
As we're talking, I'm remembering a few of my favorite memories of you. The first is this concept of servant leadership because it snowed one day and you were out there with the custodial staff in the morning shoveling the path. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
And maybe
And
it's
it's
your,
not a lot and it was slippery.
yeah, you didn't want anybody to slip. And you were out there like with them early in the morning before the kids, just shoveling the walk. And just this image of seeing the principal doing the same work alongside the custodial staff, that resonated with me. And I carried that with me. Jack Newell, he always used to say in his talks that everyone counts as one. No one is less and no one is more. And that's like kind of the sign of the healthy culture.
Yeah.
What did you learn in terms of a process you would go through at each new
Yeah.
site?
So before the school year started, I invited everyone to meet with me individually. And I asked 3 questions. I asked, what's going really well that I should know about and that I shouldn't mess with? What do you think's not going well that I should know about so that we can improve on it?
Mhm.
And what else do you think I should know that's really important? So I gave them those 3 questions ahead of time. And I invited them to come and meet with me individually anytime, either through the summer. They could just set up an appointment, or we could do it even in the fall when people came back if they were traveling or something. And I met with every single person. And you start to see patterns will emerge, and you'll start to notice where a lot of people are noticing things that are a struggle, or a thing that needs to be changed or needs to be adjusted, or what were some of the sore points for people from previous administrators or previous systems of support that they had or didn't have. And
Mm.
the intent of that was to try to find out what were some of the biggest issues and try to get a quick win. So within the first few weeks of the school year, find a solution that could at least start making some progress towards fixing that. If it wouldn't be fixable within a short period of time, at least showing progress towards that. That would build a lot of street cred, right? This person heard me. This person recognized what I had said. I must not have been the only one. So maybe I wasn't going crazy. And seeing that some of those things were being addressed and were being followed up on. That, I think that would be advice I would give to people who are transitioning to a new building, to make sure that you take time to hear from everybody. You're going to have some people at the district or the state or some coaches or somebody who's going to try to tell you, oh, well, don't worry about them. They're all just lazy or whatever the history is, especially for a school that's been underperforming.
Yeah.
But you still need to hear from every single person. And in the process, you might even find out, oh, you're maybe one of the ones that's kind of burned out and maybe isn't
Needs
functioning
to.
on all your cylinders. Yeah.
What were some of your best quick wins right out of the get go?
One school I remember, and it depends. You could ask some teachers and they might say, no, that was dumb because it might not have been on their radar or they didn't think that it was a good move. But I'm thinking of one school where almost every single person said, these kids in this in school suspension, all they do is they just mess around. And they were also really worried that they didn't have a space to be like a faculty room. And so there was two messages that were kind of coming out of that. We don't have a very positive place for our own faculty to be able to get together, and then also this concern that in school suspension was not run well and kids weren't held to any kind of standards or there were no consequences kind of thing. And one of the things I did is I swapped those rooms. And actually some people were kind of like, that was stupid. Why'd you do that? Faculty room was in this tiny little dark room underneath these stairs in this corner of the building that was kind of tough to get to depending on where your room was and wasn't very very positive. The thing was the teachers ended up with a bright area. We brought in more like soda machines and more places that was cleaner and brighter. And then it also moved the students who had been kind of out front and center, and everybody who ran by, they got to have an audience because they were kind of in this main area. And it
Yes.
just moved them out of that view, right? If you're in school suspension, you're in this tiny little area out of everybody's view. Very
Yes.
difficult to, get your friends to come and hang out with you and try to
Yeah.
separate. It's not that I wanted kids to be in this dark area, but there was only two kids maybe at a time that needed to be in there. We didn't need a lot of space. They didn't need a whole classroom. So that was one thing that I worked on based on what they had said. And in the end, I think most people were really supportive and felt like it was once it kind of got settled in. But of course, change is hard for some people. When you take away things that people are used to complaining about, it actually kind of throws them off their game a little bit because I used to complain all the time about this. And now what am I going to complain about?
What's with the culture of complaining?
Do you remember the no complaint bracelets?
No. Was that
I
after
swear
I
I
was
have
there?
one here. So there is a book called maybe a no complaint rule. I'll have to get, but they give out for schools. You can even get them for free, these silicone bracelets. And so they had been sort of a group of complainers, and we just offered people the option. They didn't have to do it, but if they wanted to join in, you could get one of these bracelets and wear it. When you complained, you'd have to move it from one wrist to the other. And you would try to go 21 days without having to move your wrist. What we found out is we had to eventually, as a community, define what complaining was. Because people were like, I don't know, was this really complaining or not? The truth is, you have to talk about problems if you're going to solve them, right?
Yes.
So we were like, well, that's not really complaining if you're trying to find a solution. So we made a rule then that if you chose to complain about a system or a program or something that was happening within the school, you wouldn't count it as complaining if you followed up with a solution.
Right.
So then it shifted all of the ways we had been used to thinking so that we would lead off with the solution because it was part of our agreement, our challenge that we had made for ourselves. We're having some problems with fourth grade lunch times because most of the other kids are not out on time and our kids don't have time to sit or they don't get served fast enough or whatever, right? People would be really quick to complain. But if you came with that expectation that you had to provide a solution to try to fix it, then you wouldn't have to switch your wristband. It really had a shift on the culture and made us all problem solvers. That was probably one of the most powerful shifts I have seen in a school when everybody embraces that and everybody takes that on as part of their own responsibility because the truth is we're all leaders. We're all part of the success of this school.
Tracy, you're in a really unique position that's different from a lot of the folks I'm talking with because you've just retired. So you are in a position to share a little bit of a harder story, but are very common experiences for a principal. Have you thought about stories that you wanted to share?
Yeah, actually, I feel as if I have a few that fall within this same category. The idea of the impact of experiences that students have, these traumatic experiences that students have, and how that affects the administration, how that affects school leadership. We've done some great research on, how it affects teachers and, some of that trauma informed practices to create spaces that is supportive for our students. The truth is that the administrative role we started earlier in this conversation, it's a lonely position, especially if you don't have an assistant principal. You don't typically have a place that you can turn to be able to just commiserate and brainstorm with. The specific story that I think you and I spoke about was for a young man who he was in fourth grade, and this is in the news. So all of this you can find. It's not private information anymore. But this young man named Josue, he had been killed by his sister during the summer months, which brings up a whole nother layer of what do we do as a school, because summer break is not good for our kids who have poverty, who have family challenges, who might have housing assistance issues or food insecurities. So he was being watched by his older sister who was happening to work at a restaurant. So she just brought him along because she was doing some food prep to try to get ready for that evening at the restaurant. Not sure what the trigger was. This kid could be kind of mischievous, but he had a great smile and he was very positive. If you weren't really careful, you could have a bunch of your stickers or marbles or markers or whatever in his pockets when he was kind of walking out. So he was definitely kind of a guy to keep an eye on, but he was such a happy guy. Somehow his sister and the person she was working with, they made the decision to punish him by making him stand in his underwear in a tall garbage can full of ice water. And he wasn't in there very long, maybe 40 minutes, but it was enough to lower his body temperature and he died. And both those people, this is 10, 15 years later, but both of them are still in prison. The mother is still without her son. It was just a horrible, horrible experience happening in the summer and hearing about it. And, as administrator, you have so many responsibilities to make sure everybody's safe and make sure everybody's taken care of. I think the most frustrating piece about that is that we had made multiple, multiple calls to DCFS, our Child Protective Services, to make sure that this kid had the help that he needed because we knew that things were not good where he was at. And whether or not we were really aware where all that abuse was coming from, we just know the signs that we saw. To know that even in the midst of all those calls we had made, and I'm going to say maybe seven or
Mhm.
nine we had made, we failed this little guy. We did not do enough to make sure that he was okay. And so there you are. You just go through all in your head about what else could you have done and the guilt that will come, or maybe there's anger and blame. And, you find yourself kind of in a place where you know that your number one job is to make sure that students are learning. And in the midst of that, you've got to have that Maslow hierarchy of needs. You've got to have that safe space. You've got to have all those pieces in place so kids have space in their brain to be able to do that learning. It was very, very tough on the staff. I knew him certainly, but I did not work with him every day like his teachers did. For them to have that loss was so hard. It made me think at the very same school where this young man was from. So this was at Lincoln. My very first day of being a principal, show up at my office. And first of all, you feel like such a fraud because
Yeah.
yesterday I was a coach and today I'm a principal and I'm supposed to know everything, right? So you go through this whole period of you're just a poser, you're a fraud, you don't know what you're doing, and empty school, it's the middle of the summer, you start in July. But in my case, I have this very clear memory of the helicopters overhead, day after day after day for this first 3 weeks of school, because a young 5-year-old girl who was supposed to be in kindergarten that fall was missing. They couldn't find her. So the police was hovering over the school. They came to the school to look. They were doing a check. They kept looking. They kept trying to find this girl that was missing. And that was such a the word is like, kind of a hollow beginning for my career. It felt hollow because I don't know this girl, she hasn't even started school, and yet my world is bounded by these police and the story and the worry and the neighbors and all of that concern and upset. I think a lot of people too, they don't think about Utah. Utah doesn't have any problems, right? It's just a bunch of white people and they all have money and food. And that's kind of I think the
The
general
impression.
consensus. Yeah. And it is true. If you go look at the level of poverty across the nation, I believe that Utah has the least percentage of kids in poverty. Now, that's
Hmm.
not saying we don't have poverty. They're very packed into certain schools. This
Yep.
school was one of them.
Yep.
But anyways, they found eventually this girl had been killed by a neighbor, had lured her. He was trying to make her stop screaming. So he put his hand over her, mouth and held her tight and she died. She didn't get the air she needed and he hid her in his basement. Finally, the police were able to track it down, and it was haunting. What have I gotten myself into? What is going on? I'm expecting to have little kindergarten kids sitting on the carpet and singing songs and learning alphabet and marching to the bathroom. And here we had this sad, sad event. And I think that people don't realize to the extent that these things happen in our community. I've given you two examples that both can be found on the news and in the newspapers if you were to do a search. But there are so many stories that don't make it to the news that we know about, that we hold on to, and we don't have a way to be able to talk about it. We don't have a way to process it. The piece that's the hardest is it erodes your feeling of being able to have an impact. It increases your feeling of helplessness when all you want to do is to serve and support and make this a place where kids come, they're safe and they can learn. When those things happen, and of course, both of those examples were horrible stories outside of the school setting, but they were part of our community and they were part of our family and they were who we were in that neighborhood. And they had touched our space and our world and our group of people, if you will, our family. It was hard in both of those cases. There's a third one that just happened now. This is not my kid, but it's so much like the first story I told you, where 7 times the school had made a complaint to the Child Protective Services, and they followed up and they'd interview the families, and the family got tired of it. So you know what they did? They homeschooled him.
Right.
And then a year later, he had
Yep.
died from starvation. Where are we as a culture and as a community where that can happen in the US? And of course, there's so much more to that story. These people were mentally unwell. There's
Yeah.
levels of trauma and issues there. But one, is our Child Protective Services really providing support at the level we need them to? I don't think we funded them enough. I don't think we funded mental health supports enough.
Mhm.
Over time, those monies have slowly been redirected. When we have this task of making sure students are actively engaged in learning and becoming important connected citizens in our communities, those pieces are important: being well fed, being safe, making sure that you have the mental health supports.
As I'm listening to you talk, Tracy, like it's almost like the principal is this very unique community leader.
Yeah, it is true. The role of principal is to in a way be this beacon, if you will, of possibilities. This beacon of all things possible, so that when your kids come to us, we are going to do everything we can to give them what they need. For some communities, they defer to the expertise of the educators to such a level actually that I'm a little uncomfortable with it, because I don't think they recognize their role as a family also in helping our students be learners, lifelong learners. But you're right. There is this role that principals play in being able to help rally, if you will, the community around this group of small little people. This is our future right here in front of us. These are the people who are going to eventually grow up and They're going to be the nurses that have to take care of me in the nursing home. They're going to be the ones that are going to choose whether or not they're going to run for office, or whether they're going to be taking care of the stores or the neighbors, or, provide different kinds of services. That continually reaching down to lift up these young people is such an important piece that we do together as a community. I think the principal has to help navigate and coordinate and pull those pieces together. And let me just say this. I think we started with saying that principals don't get enough coaching and don't get enough training and support, right? I also think that the principal and their own mental health has not been realized to the level that it should, because you carry that weight and you don't have a place that you can turn to get support, or even to brainstorm, or even do your own kind of like, I need help with this, or this is really weighing me down right now. We know all that stress and the worry and other things, they have like a toll on your body, right? Increased blood pressure, sleep disruption can affect your immune system. I think that we owe it to these people in this corner office of the school, so to speak, this leadership role. They deserve a way to be able to come together and learn from each other and get renewed, because they don't as much as we need them to. And then they
Right.
get crabby and they get kind of snippy and they get tired and they start just, let me
Make
just
making
suspend you
that
one more time because I'm sick of you.
Yeah, when they don't take care of themselves. I remember you talking about that a lot, and I did not understand it until I was actually in the position. How can you describe that you have to actually be in it? What's going on there?
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. Sometimes I came to you and I said, Joan, you just have to go home. You have to go home. You were so passionate about the work, you stayed. And there's like a tipping point, right? Where eventually you become so tired, you might not be firing on all those cylinders. You might not be humming along at the level you should, and you need to step away. I think the same could be true for principals. You need another layer of someone who's helping to check in with that principal and helping to, do sort of a pulse. How is your mental health? How is your level of happiness? How's your level of patience? How's your problem solving skills going right now? If you see that that principal is now just complaining about everything, they may not be in the place where they're a good fit to be in that leadership role anymore. The truth is, we need our principals in that incredibly important. They lift the weight. They have to be on the top of their game. So maybe an outsider who could be a coach, because I think that an outsider who's not your administrator, who can hear and see the patterns and can give you feedback, that person should be able to say as well, hey, I feel like maybe you're not seeing things as clearly anymore. We don't always provide the level of support that we need. I think right now, the politics of education, there's a lot of demonizing about all the things that schools are doing to, make our kids into somebody that they're not, or that I don't want them to be. They're brainwashing or what have you with our kids.
Yeah.
People, first of all, don't have enough time for that. But it's in the media. And so even more so, what you're talking about is, I think, an important element to consider is people are leaving education. Some areas of our country, even more than others, there's a number of districts that couldn't find enough teachers. And as far as principals, I was involved in hiring for principals this last summer to take the place of positions that were opening this fall, and not a big pool. Not a big pool of people. I'm not saying that they weren't good candidates out there, but the people who have experience, they've decided to go into real estate, or they've decided that they're going to go, work in another area, another field where they don't have the demands, they don't have the negative media. It's just not worth some of that
Burden.
it's true. That's probably the best way. So they don't have the burden. They have a little more freedom and flexibility. So yeah, you're absolutely right that we haven't been really taken care of. If I had my way, I wish that when we get to the airlines and they used to say, okay, if you're a veteran, you could be the first to get on the plane. I really wish that they would say, okay, if you've been a school principal, or if you've even been an educator, that you have that announcement, because we also know from COVID, when we had our kids home with us, we realized how tough it is to help our kids learn and how important it is for us. And we're still rebuilding from that. We definitely
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. I love that image of the educators getting the same level of status.
Yeah.
If you had a message for the American public, what you would want them to know about their school principal, and what would be your message to teachers?
To some extent, there's some similarity in the response, both for teachers and for the community. And that message would be your principal can't tell you everything. They can only tell you what is allowable under FERPA, under state law, under what is a need to know basis. They can't give you more information. You may think it's the worst decision, or you may think there's mistakes or error. How could that be true? Or that kid's been bullying, or whatever your challenges that you're facing, you need to know that your principal cannot tell you everything. And you may be like, what happened to that kid? Your principal can't tell you. It's not because they don't want to. It's not because they don't believe that you shouldn't know. They just can't tell you because we have this policy about student privacy. And that's true too if you're a teacher. There are things that you can't know. That's part of the burden that the principal has to carry when we talk about them being in isolation and needing to have an outlet. They really wish they could tell everything to everybody and explain all the reasons why they make the decisions that they do. But when you move into the shoes of the principal, and this is where it's even a little different than the assistant principal because the buck really does stop there. And when you're there in those shoes, you are the one that has to make the decisions. And you gather as much information as you can. You try to make the best decision based on the information you have at that point. I think that's probably one of the most important things is your principal cannot tell you everything. And you have to trust them. They are using all the information they have to make the best decision. Another piece is from the teacher's standpoint is I think to some extent tenure's been a good thing for us. And at another level, I think tenure sometimes has actually become a ball and chain in the sense that we as educators over time have stopped learning that self-awareness and the growth. I feel that there are times when we have protected people who are not good employees. And again, as a teacher, you don't know what I know. I
Right.
can't tell you what that teacher did. I can't tell you what that teacher didn't do. I can't tell you how that teacher did or did not follow through on what needs to happen. But again, you have to trust that if the principal's doing their job,
Right. There's always another side to the story. They know that administrators can't talk about that, and so they
yeah.
can spin whatever narrative
Yeah,
they
and that's the thing. Principal can't say a word, but the teacher's out there telling their story loud and proud, and it might not even be an accurate version of what's happened. So it's a very difficult, isolating place to be when you're in those shoes.
Thanks for listening to This American Principal. If today's story resonated with you, share this podcast with a colleague, a friend, or anyone who needs a reminder of just how hard and how vital school leadership really is. And if you've got a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. Head over to www.leadingforlearning.com to share your experience. Because this isn't just a podcast, it's a community. Together, we are lifting up the voices of the people who make schools work. Until next time, keep leading with courage, clarity, and heart.